So again, thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. Again, this is a sports journalism panel with the combination of ONA-LA, MUCRAC, and SCNG. So I am James Williams. I actually work for the Southern California News Group as a digital sports producer, and more importantly, these are awesome people here on the panel. On my left is Thuc Nhi Nguyen, who is a LA Times staff writer who covers USC, UCLA, and the NBA teams. And then Kevin is also here, Kevin Colindres, who is an LA Times community sports reporter who covers high school sports and other stuff. Right. Yeah. Cool. And Eve Troeh, awesome, got it, is a senior editorial producer for ESPN, and it oversees ESPN's daily podcast with Mia Kimes, correct? Cool. So thank you guys for being here. So for the first question, what are some of the experiences you guys have had in sports journalism? We'll start with Tiffany. And how have your experiences helped get you to where you are today?
So I also used to work at Southern California News Group. I was fortunate enough to do an internship through SJI, which is Sports Journalism Institute, and they pair you up with internships everywhere, and mine happened to be with the Southern California News Group, so I did that my summer between junior and senior year in college, and then I went back to school and finished my degree, and as I was graduating, I just kept badgering the editors for a job, and then they hired me back, so they hired me back. I started covering high schools, then I added soccer, and then I covered UCLA for about 3.5 academic seasons, and then I started working at the Times in October, so I'm relatively new there, and now I'm kind of a general assignment reporter, and I think it's a lot more liberating now not being a beat reporter, because I get to kind of float around and do things that are fun and interesting, and I don't need to really worry about a lot of the minutiae anymore, so I love my new job. It's really fun. Very lucky.
We'll probably get a little bit more into that, because I'm curious too. After Thuc Nhi left the Southern California News Group, like she said, she was the UCLA beat writer. I filled in for her. I don't know how you do it. It was an experience for sure. Kevin, tell us a little bit about yourself, your experiences, and what brought you here today.
Yeah, sure. So I started writing in high school. I think my sophomore year. I always liked to write. I always liked sports, so I tried it out. And as the years went by, I became more interested in writing newspapers. So I became the sports editor. And then after that, I transferred to community college, Santa Monica College, and I decided I'm just going to go for it. So I wrote for the paper there a little bit, but it wasn't until I transferred to Cal State Long Beach where I really kind of fell in love with it, like college sports stuff like that. And I was an assistant sports editor my first year, and then my senior year I was the sports editor, covered stuff like Final Four, men's volleyball. We won that year, so I felt pretty lucky as a sports editor to do all that coverage. And after that, I graduated, and I was very rusty emailing editors for jobs, and luckily I was able to move back home to Glendale and cover high school sports with the LA Times community.
Cool, man.
So, yeah, that's what I'm doing now.
And Eve, a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm probably the newest to sports journalism of anybody, maybe even in this room. I came up through public broadcasting, through NPR, and I've worked in the news space, just the general news space, business news. I ran the newsroom in New Orleans for New Orleans Public Radio. So I found my way to sports journalism via, I would say, just storytelling and doing great narrative audio journalism, so that when ESPN wanted to get into that space, and they were seeking people to run this new podcast, which is a daily show, a deep dive into one big story, Monday through Friday. And, my experience doing that in the realms of business news and in regional news, like in Louisiana, and in podcasting, no one's more surprised than me that audio is hot, that people actually want to like listen to and make audio journalism products. That I got the call, and it was an amazing opportunity, and that's where I kind of came into the sports journalism world. I had definitely covered some sports stories throughout my time in journalism, like after Hurricane Katrina, covered some of the reopening of the Superdome, covered high school football team in Pass Christian, Mississippi, and sort of, I think we've seen stories like that after even the fires in Northern California, stories of teams and sports being something that bring people together after traumatic events. And I've covered, events here and there, Bayou Classic, things like that in New Orleans mostly, over certain times when I was working for Marketplace, which is a nationally distributed business program in radio, now and then doing a few sports stories on, the business side of things. But in terms of just doing sports journalism, I'm really new to it. Just started when the show launched in October. So I'm definitely getting to know this community a lot more.
So just kind of staying, I guess, maybe with the audio and side of things, as we all know, with the tragic event with Kobe Bryant and the 8 others involved in that accident, the day that happens, what is the process of trying to plan an audio project, or how do you, what is like the game plan going into something like, oh, Kobe Bryant? Like, how do you don't prepare for that,
No,
obviously.
no.
But
I would love to hear the other panelists' experiences with that too. So when that news happened, myself and the host of our show, Mina Kimes, and our other 2 producers, all 4 of us were actually on a plane, not on the same plane, on different planes, headed to Miami for the week ahead of the Super Bowl. We were planning to do the podcast from there that week. So we found out while we were all in the air. I was actually like dozing and got a news alert, and which I don't even know why I got that news alert, because I hadn't bought the Wi-Fi pass, and I had it. I don't know how.
But you needed to know that.
I guess I really don't know how I got that news alert, because I don't know how I got it, but I got it, and I woke up and I looked at it. I'm like, what? Like, I'm sure as most people did it. I thought, like, what is this? Is this real? Is this true? Like, what is this? And I told my seatmates, who were also sleeping, I just kind of was like, hey, I don't know what to do here. Like, tell some people, like strangers, strangers are talking about this. And then I did buy the Wi-Fi pass for the plane was planning to sleep on the plane. That those plans were changed.
Usually doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it definitely changed. And so by the time we landed in Miami, we had planned to go to the studios. We do have a studio in Miami for some of our podcasts. The Levitard podcasts are done out of there. The Clevelander, which is actually in a hotel. Like, it's like a studio basically in a hotel. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. Like, they took us through, like, how do we get to there? They took us through the kitchen, and they took us up the service elevator, and there were tons of, I'm losing my name tag. My name's Eve. They keep, so there were other shows too, obviously, that were pivoting and covering, and Pardon the Interruption was taping. There were all kinds of, people in Miami figuring out how to cover this. We have gotten in touch with Ramona Shelburne, who's a fantastic ESPN reporter, covered Kobe for most of his 20 years with the Lakers, and we arranged for some time to talk to her. Our host landed, and also we all met up at the studio. And usually if you've heard our podcast, it's a pretty highly produced podcast. It's not just microphones up and people talking. We edit down the interviews, we add in sound, we add in music, that type of thing. And usually we prepare a lot. So, we prepare, we write questions, we kind of structure the narrative, we structure the interview. So for this, we knew we had limited time with Ramona. We just were thinking about what to ask, and we just started with, right before we connected with her. Also, she could connect earlier than we expected, and there's just a lot of catch-as-catch-can going on. So we didn't have the questions even written, and it's just, what should I ask? I'm like, just start with, where are you? What's happening? I mean, the basics, right? And she was there at the crash site in Calabasas, so that's where she was, and she's describing to us the scene of. She was near the Mamba Academy, and she's like, there are people walking around. There are already memorials being created here in terms of just leaving flowers and objects and signs and things like that. And she Ramona herself was also very emotional because she had a pretty personal relationship with Kobe Bryant, and so we just allowed her to tell us what was going on, tell us about her day, how she'd found out, what she had been seeing, what she'd been hearing, and then go into just sort of a remembrance, a little more personal than you usually would, because she did know him and have a relationship. And that was our show. We did a few things. We stayed up till, we recorded around 8 p.m. Eastern time, and we probably finished at like 1 or 2 in the morning, putting the show together and uploading it, which is, our show comes out at 5 a.m. Eastern every day, so that was, we knew we were going to get it done, but it was basically an all-nighter. It's sitting in the hotel lobby of in Miami. Everyone else is like on South Beach, like having fun, and we're in the lobby using the Wi-Fi to make our show. And we did a few things. So we didn't put any music in. We made some decisions to make it just a more bare bones production. But that's how that went down.
And it took me. I don't know how involved you were. I'm sure you were.
I did a little bit.
Only a little.
Only a little bit. I mean, most of the heavy lifting was done by our writers and our editors and Eddie back there.
I was there when it broke.
Our digital team, like, they did so much stuff. I was like in awe of just like watching them work on Twitter. I was like, let's go, guys. But for me, I was sitting at the UCLA women's basketball game. They were playing that morning, and the news broke while they were on the court, and so they were already warming up, and so none of the players on the court knew. No one knew, but everyone in the stadium knew, and there were like people whispering about it the whole time, and it was really weird. It felt weird, but then afterwards, my like contribution to that day was I asked some of the players and the coaches about their memories of Kobe and like what he meant to them personally. But honestly, most of the work was done by the people who are much smarter and better than me. So shout out to you, Eddie.
So in a situation like that where you are starting your day covering the women's basketball team, did you have a gamer still on the UCLA game, or was it very Kobe?
Yeah, I did a gamer that was just the normal gamer, and then I did a online separate, like, this is what they said about Kobe, because like Corey Close, who's the UCLA women's basketball coach, she started her opening statement with information with her thoughts on Kobe. So it was kind of a thing that was hanging over the entire team. The coaches knew during the game. They found out like during the national anthem, but they didn't want to tell the players to like distract them. So none of the players knew, but the coaches knew. And so right after the game, the coaches told the players. And so the players were like when they got, there were 2 players on the podium for the press conference, and you could see they'd literally just been told this information, and you could see them processing the information. And everyone else had been able to process it for, by that time, like 2, maybe 3 hours. And so we were kind of past that, but it was interesting to see the look on their face as they were like thinking through the information that we had already thought.
Right.
Yeah, it was a very weird situation. But that was my contribution.
Kevin, anything? Did you do any reporting that day, or did anything stand out as far as sports journalism when it came to Kobe on that day for you?
What stood out for me was for like a local paper, like the community news, like we covered Glendale, La Crescenta. What they kind of angled it, like one of their stories was like about how this helicopter like passed through Glendale and Burbank and all that stuff. And then what surprised me was all the stories that came after, like local high schools like celebrating Kobe, stuff like that you won't really get from like the flagship paper like the LA Times. So yeah, that was like our coverage of that. I didn't have any like hand in it myself, but yeah, that's how like you get a local paper covering like a worldwide news story.
Awesome. And speaking about some of your guys' organizations and newsrooms, what effort have you seen from your editors and your newsrooms when it comes to diversity, as far as the people that they hire or the way they go about maybe including more women's sports coverage, for example? We could start with Thuc Nhi this way and go that way, if you don't mind.
Well, I think them hiring me recently is like an example of diversity
Mhm.
hiring, obviously. And I think since I started, I don't know if I'm doing this on purpose or like someone is trying to make me do this on purpose, but like I've been writing a lot of women's basketball
Mhm.
stories, and apparently the LA Times hasn't been doing that recently or in previous years. So we've been seeing some college women's basketball stories on the front page of sports, and people reach out to me like, oh, we've never seen this before. Oh, really? Well, I've only been working here for 4 months, so I don't know what happened in the past.
Right.
But so I've been kind of doing a lot of that, and it helps just because we did get a new owner recently, so we've been doing a lot of new hiring,
Mhm.
which helps kind of like spread out our staff a little bit. So usually I've been writing a lot of UCLA stories because I used to cover UCLA, but in my old job as the UCLA reporter at the Daily News, I would be covering men's basketball, football, and those take up enough time, and I just didn't have time or like the energy to go cover gymnastics or women's basketball all the time. And so now, because I'm a little bit of a floater, I'm able to go in and fill in some of the gaps and cover women's basketball and write stories about UCLA women's basketball, who's number 9 in the country, USC women's basketball. I did some stories about Kobe and his relationship to the WNBA. And those are kind of stories that it's just all the other people and everything else that they're doing. There's just not enough time in the day and not enough energy in the day. So it was really helpful that we were able to hire just more people so we can go out and kind of double team, triple team kind of areas. So like shout out to our owner for being able to hire more people, I guess.
And I'm definitely going to get back to you about the gymnastics thing. That's for sure. Kevin?
So I would say that when it comes to like covering both like boys and girls sports and the high school level, I think it's pretty even. But what I do notice is a lack of like female reporters, at least where I work.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure if that's because they're not applying or if they're just not getting hired. But there's definitely a gap in that situation, and I feel like it should be pretty even.
Yeah, I would agree with you, especially the even amount of men and women, boys and girls sports at schools.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
there
There's
should
a
be
sport for each one.
right, and it wouldn't have to be that women reporters need to cover women's sports or
Yeah.
anything along those lines. But
It's all about perspective. too.
right,
I mean, women have perspective that I don't have, and we need more of that in writing.
oh yeah, for sure. Not only in writing, but even in something like in audio, podcasting.
Yes. So again, also only been with the company for 4 months, but I would say our team has a great mix of people. We're split between the East Coast and LA. Our host, Mina Kimes, is really making her name mostly as an NFL reporter and analyst, but she also comes from a General Assignment magazine writing background. She's written about everything from bat flipping in Korea to gymnast profiles. She's covered the range of sports, even though now she kind of specializes more in football. And we have 2 producers here in LA who are women. And I think one of the interesting things for me has been to see our host's response to the basically trolling of women who report on sports.
Right.
She is doing her own podcast every week, the Mina Kimes Show, about football specifically, and then ESPN Daily is meant to be more of a broad range of sports, but also like reaching a broader audience. So we're meant to be for anyone, the casual fan to the most avid fan, to be able to listen to. So sometimes when Mina talks football, she's so knowledgeable, she gets super inside super fast, and that's knowledge that she's earned and won over time, and it's like her specialty, right? So I'm just going to speak to this specific challenge as a way to answer your question. to ask her to ask a question that's a little more basic, like, hey, you know, we know what QBR is, you know, but somebody listening who's not a super football person might not know what QBR is. So can you just say quarterback rating instead of QBR? And it hurts her. It hurts her in her soul to do that because she is so sensitive to not sounding like she doesn't know what she's talking about. Right. She already faces, and I see it on Twitter, and then I hear it in talking to her, and I can just sense it from her. She faces such a harder battle to show that she knows what she's talking about as a woman covering NFL, that like anytime she has to like feel like she has to lower herself even the slightest bit, and that's not even the right way to really say it, that it's hard for her to do that. She's concerned how that could impact her image and her hard-won status as like a top elite football reporter, you know? And so that's just an example of where I think like in the making of the show, those things really come to bear. In terms of, you're kind of talking about two tracks when you're talking about this kind of stuff. There's the who are we talking to? Because on our show we mostly interview other reporters at ESPN, and we also do one big story a day. So we get into like we need those big meaty stories that can hold a 20-minute episode. And if we were to just kind of go with, I mean, it's been interesting to me to see who's writing those big, like 2,500 word profiles, those longer pieces. I would say it's surprisingly easy to book a week of shows that are all older white male reporters. And it's like, oh wow, look at that! Like just all the articles we're looking at are all written by like older white male reporters, and they're fantastic writers, fantastic reporters. But that was sort of like, okay, you know, that's not my idea of a good week of shows. It needs to be diverse in terms of the sports that we cover, in terms of the voices that we're hearing, in terms of the geographic regions even that we're looking at, and I guess I've been surprised at needing to be as intentional as it seems like we're going to have to be to get that mix on the show. So that's, you know, there, and also being new to sports journalism myself, I definitely feel like I probably am being female. I feel like I just try to own it, you know, to say I am not of this world. There are a lot of people at ESPN who've spent their whole careers there. They've been there, you know, 20 plus years, some people, and so I just, you know, play the I'm new here card as often as I need to, and try to get past that imposter syndrome that some of us often carry with us, and just say, you know, I own it. Like you probably do know a ton more than me, but you know, I know good storytelling, I know good audio production, and I'm here at this table for a reason, and so, you know, let's work together.
So I guess it's probably been a year now. I was a fellow through the APSE, Associated Press Sports Editors program that they have. And one of the things we talked about when we were in Tennessee was on the East Coast. A lot of the other fellows were on the East Coast, and they mentioned how covering gymnastics was a thing. And being in Southern California, I was like, I don't think we've ever written or thought about covering women or gymnastics in general, other than when the Olympics were around. And then a few months later, UCLA gymnastics like blows up into this big trendy thing, and so all of us hopped on board, obviously. And we were all for it, and it did really well online. So I was like all for it. Like, we need to do more of this gymnastics stuff. It's great. And Thuc Nhi was the one out there writing about it. So how did that whole thing happen? What was the discussion with Tom Moore and the sports department through SCNG to, I mean, were you covering it?
You're talking about Caitlin Hashi?
Yeah, her and the team, and like, how did it
Well,
happen?
I was actually, I had written a preview of the season before Caitlin Hashi got big.
Okay, right.
Because going into the year, we knew it was going to be an important year because the gymnastics coach who was there for 39 years was retiring, Miss Val. And so I wrote this big story about her before the season. So I was like already kind of there. I did gymnastics for 10 years of my life, so I was very plugged into the gymnastics world, and I knew UCLA is big in the gymnastics world. Even before Caitlin was famous, UCLA gymnastics was famous in gymnastics. So I love watching UCLA do gymnastics, and so I kind of planned on actually writing a story about Caitlin even before she got big, and then she ends up getting famous after her first routine of the year. I was like, oh well, I should go write that now.
Yeah.
And I think honestly, everyone from her, Miss Val, the team, everyone in our paper was pretty surprised about how much that carried on, because I think she was like, okay, I'm gonna get famous for this 1 week, 2 weeks, and it's gonna go away. It never went away.
It never did.
She's still famous.
I was like, oh, it's good. It's gonna be on the budget. We're gonna write about it. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be one of those things. And then the next week, like, oh, Thuc Nhi's out there again. Oh, Thuc Nhi's out. Like, oh, we're covering the whole season. Like, oh.
Yeah, and then
Okay.
like I think we just responded to what people were asking for, and I loved doing it because if I could cover gymnastics full time, I would. Like that's so fun. But I think it was just it was just fun and different, and the great thing about working with Tom and Brian was that if I had a story idea, they would never be like, no, that's bad.
Right.
They would just be like, okay, go do it. Whatever you want to do, go do it. And that was a lot of fun in my beat time because I really got to make it whatever I wanted. And when gymnastics got big, I was like, okay, I'm a full-time gymnastics writer now. Sorry, guys.
It really was.
And like the men's basketball team wasn't good last year at UCLA. Spring football, who cares about spring football anyway? So I was about gymnastics, and it was really great that the editorial staff was behind me and allowing me to go do that, not making me go write more spring football or go write about why the UCLA men's basketball team is still bad. Well, they're good now, but so I think it's just a matter of going where the people want you to go. People were interested in gymnastics, so like, why wouldn't you write about more gymnastics?
And I think like that's the thing too, whether you're just getting into sports journalism or you're already into it, is being able to diversify, I guess, or whatever it is that you're covering, and be open to something. Maybe not just waiting for your editor to ask you that, hey, this gymnastics thing is a thing, but like you said, you're like, I was already plugged in.
Yeah.
So it was kind of easy for you. Like for me, I'm like, I don't know, we never really covered that. So it was kind of interesting. That was actually the first time I ever heard you say that you were kind of plugged into gymnastics like that. I didn't know that. Me and Kevin, actually, we went to Cal State Long Beach at the same time, and we had a couple classes together. Kevin, as someone who is freshly out of college or freshly removed from college, what advice would you give younger journalists who are trying to get their foot in the door any way they can, or even make the most out of their time while they're still in college with their college newspaper or radio station? Or
so I think my number one advice, or what I kind of use, is you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's probably the biggest thing, because I've had to do a lot of things that I'm not like so good at, but you live and you learn, and you make mistakes, and you kind of keep going. So if you're not feeling uncomfortable, you're probably not doing enough. You're probably like, you gotta challenge yourself. That's the only way you're gonna get noticed and grow as a journalist, writer, whatever you're doing.
And I think kind of bouncing off that too, it's kind of like, looking back at it now, college is really the only opportunity.
It's a perfect place, honestly. It's the place to make mistakes. Once you go somewhere like the Times or ESPN, you can't afford to make those mistakes anymore. They don't happen, but in college, it's the best way or the best place to experiment and do things. Like, I never thought I would take sports photos, but I was out there like,
there you were,
with this huge camera. I had no idea what I was doing, but you learn. And the good thing is people are there to help you and teach you. So take advantage of that. I mean, I would say I was kind of shy before, but once you start getting a rhythm, you'll be fine. Don't worry about making mistakes, especially in college. You have a lot of time.
That's definitely true. What advice would you have for younger journalists who are just starting out?
Sure. I think, it's a good time to make mistakes, but it's also a good time to, cover, like you were saying, some of these things that you have a real passion for and make a case. If you're building your portfolio, think about what's a great story. when I didn't really answer in terms of coverage of men's and women's sports on ESPN Daily. Launching a new show, there's a lot of attention paid to, well, like during NFL season, you don't have any NFL stories this week. Like, well, that's not, people aren't going to want to hear that. You need at least, you got to get an NFL story in there, or, a good mix. That's a good story, but maybe we don't want, women's basketball on Monday. Maybe we're going to start the week with some men's sports. There is definitely a sensibility of assuming what the audience wants and what they'll be most interested in pressing play on that, I think we can challenge and need to challenge. And so when you're in school, it's a great time to make a case for what you want it to look like, what you want it to be. When I was in Miami, and again, new to the sports world, we're at media night, and I've got a lot of my ESPN colleagues who I hadn't met before. One of them comes up and says, "I love the chess episode." We did an episode based on an article that a reporter at ESPN wrote about extreme training for chess grandmasters. They lose all this weight, they go through extreme training. We did an interview with her months after she wrote the article, by the way, and we turned it into a podcast in December. And here's somebody like a stalwart NFL reporter who's like, "That chess episode was awesome." So you just really don't know. If you have a great story and you have great character, great narrative, great dramatic tension, it doesn't matter what sport it's in. You can, with your writing, with your reporting, with your questions, with your own enthusiasm, you can make that a superstar story. You can make that a front page story, and the best time to start is now, as soon as you can. Like, if there's something that you're super interested in and there are great stories there, like, go for it and make the case for it. And then I think, carry that with you. Here's what I think, it can take some confidence, it can take some overcoming, and you may not, again, have your editor assign you to go do it, and you may have to really make it a thing and really bug and really say, "No, I swear this is going to be a good story, give me a shot," or "I think people are really going to like this one." And you have to, believe, in the vision that you have for what you want sports media to be, and start trying to make that happen as soon as you can. And school is the best time to start, when you can experiment.
Thuc Nhi, with I'm such a big fan of yours. It's like we work together, but the Southern California News Group has 11 different newspapers, so
we worked together for 4 years, but I didn't meet you until I was 3 years into that.
Yeah, right. Because she was always out doing something, and I'm all the way in Riverside.
Yeah.
So again, every time I see you, I always have stuff I want to ask you. One thing that I always appreciated about you was the way you engage with readers and your audience on social media, whether it was with the GIF reactions or I believe you were the creator of the bingo card.
Yep.
Allegedly,
yes.
So for the UCLA football games, especially when they were really bad.
They're still really bad.
They're still really bad. I didn't want to say it. So Thuc Nhi would, I don't know, an hour before the game, she would tweet out these bingo cards for people who would be following her tweets and stuff. Like when you're watching the game, explain it.
Yeah,
it was fun.
Because sometimes I would see people for Pac-12 After Dark games, they would make a single bingo card about weird stuff that happens in Pac-12 After Dark. But so I thought that would be fun. So one of my colleagues during a game, UCLA did this super dumb thing. They made 5 separate special teams errors in one game. They gave up a kick return touchdown, punt return touchdown, muffed a punt, all in one game. And so I listed this out in a tweet, and then one of my colleagues responded on Twitter, "Bingo," as a joke. Right. And then the next week I turned it into not a joke. And so I made 4 different bingo cards for weird stuff that UCLA does. And then I tweeted out, and so I was like, "Let's play bingo today, guys." And people thought it was hilarious, so I just kept doing it every day, every game. And I hoped that through the 4 bingo cards, someone would pick a board, and that would be the winning board. So that was fun. I feel Twitter doesn't need to be serious, especially when I was covering UCLA. they were so bad. And so we needed something to keep it light and fun. And like, I don't really like.
Give you a reason to watch.
Yeah, like I don't really like listening to people complain about how bad UCLA is. Like, I know. I watch them every day.
Right.
So,
You
like,
have to go to the practice.
yeah, like, let's laugh a little bit, you know? Let's laugh at their misfortune a little bit, you know? So, like, that's what I tried to do with the bingo. I did GIF reactions after every game. So I had people, like, send me their feelings in a GIF. And then I would, like, combine them into a little post. So I used to do that on our blog. So we used to have, like, a separate blog. And so that's where I would, like, post all videos and stuff. And one day, it was after the first UCLA game I covered on the beat. UCLA was playing at Texas A&M, and they lost in overtime. And someone, this was completely unsolicited, someone sent me a photo of their kid having, like, thrown up on themselves. And then they're like, this is how I feel about the game. And I was like, this is hilarious. Let's run with this. Everyone send me a photo or a GIF of how you feel about the game. And it, like, really took off. And I was like, okay, let's go. Let's just keep doing this. So then, like, people started thinking that was like what I did. That was my thing. And so
see, I even think that's your thing.
Yeah.
Like,
so apparently I started like being known for GIFs on Twitter. So I don't know. I just think
but like it did.
I was just kind of going for it.
But it did
keep
well.
It fun.
It
Yeah.
did well every time you did it, though. Right?
Yeah. That
even
was,
with the bingo and the
yeah.
The gift thing.
I think people look for a way to have fun on Twitter sometimes. You know, especially in sports. Like, come on, we're just watching people run around with fun. It's fine. It doesn't have to be super serious, so let's have some fun when we can.
And you're engaging with your audience, you're building your audience, and so to that, and something I've always said is, you're building that. Not only are you building an audience for in that case, the Southern California news groups UCLA covered, but more importantly, I would say probably for yourself, because now that you're with the LA Times, one, you took all the UCLA traffic with you, which made it tougher. Made it tougher on me.
Real time.
And you had all the good ideas, so anything I try to do. No, but so yeah, no, so I mean, they all would follow you now that you're over on the doing LA Times stuff.
Yeah.
And
well, no one ever reads my SC stuff anymore. Like, when I tweet about SC, they're like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah. Well,
like, why are you doing this?
And you were greatly missed because, again, when they started seeing my name show up under these UCLA or on top of these UCLA stories, they're like, "Where's Thuc Nhi? Like, who are you and where's like what happened to her?" I'm like, "She's at the LA Times now. Go, like, she still does some UCLA stuff." I had to like explain it to them. And they miss you, so your readers are very loyal. Another thing, or actually, I want to go back to you real quick.
Sure.
I don't know how much involvement you may have had with, if at all, Ramona Shelburne, as we mentioned earlier, with her podcast on Donald Sterling. I would say that is probably a really good example of how you can look back at older stories or find ways to, I don't want to say repurpose stories, but to make a podcast series out of something that happened, I guess, 5-6 years ago now. It still kind of feels like that was like just last year. But do you mind telling us how audio and podcasting can be used, not only for a Kobe Bryant situation as it happens when it happens, but to tell or give more information about a story that sometimes it's harder to do in a written story?
Sure. I was not involved in the Sterling affairs, although it is amazing and everyone should listen to it. Ramona Shelburne's look at Donald Sterling and his relationship.
Yeah.
Relationship in many senses, with the team, with his wife, with another woman.
Right.
Ramona has some amazing access, and she's just her excellence as an NBA reporter is what really made that series possible. You know, I mean, it took so much to get the access to the sources for that. I would say, in terms of audio, well, number one, this kind of goes back to your question about advice. If you're interested in learning audio, and your program does or doesn't teach it, there's a program called Next Gen Radio that's affiliated with National Public Radio, and they do these week-long audio production trainings, and I've been involved with them for a really long time. So it's Next Gen Radio. They do at least 2 projects a year in Southern California, and one, I think, also in Sacramento. But look it up, see what they're about. If you're interested in getting involved in audio production, it's a great way to learn. with audio, you know, one of the reasons I was so interested in this job at ESPN is because of the amazing archives we have. So we've got like tons of great stuff that we can draw from. And one of my favorite examples is over the holidays. This is a story I actually did for TV years ago, and they run it apparently every Christmas. It's this story about how Philadelphia Eagles fans apparently booed Santa Claus.
It's not as bad as it sounds.
It's not as bad as it sounds. That Philadelphia Eagles fans were so tough and so nasty and so onerous that Santa Claus came out at a game in the winter and they booed Santa and threw snowballs, slush balls, ice balls at Santa.
This was in 1976.
And so this is an ESPN story again. They did this story long before I got to the network. They did it on TV. But they play it all the time. So we just interviewed the reporter, Jeremy Schaap. He found the guy who played Santa that day and got his account of it. They've got like all these other people's. They did sort of like it was a true documentary. They really did try to get to the bottom of the story. Santa, they're like, well, we booed him because he was drunk. He swears he was not drunk. You know, like all these differing accounts. And we decided we would go ahead and just make that a podcast, like the story of getting the story. Like, how did you find the guy who played Santa that day? He's like, well, you heard of the phone book. like we just found him. It was super easy to find once they knew his name. And we were able to use the sound from the original TV piece, and then we just ran like the Nutcracker Suite under it at certain times, and it was great. You know, we were able to draw on amazing archival tape that way. We also are fortunate to have some great work that's done with E60, which is a TV series for ESPN, and so, you know, sometimes they do splits where we have all the audio from all of those available. So even if something ran a couple of years ago, if that player is in the news again, or if there's another chapter to that person's story, we can have this great, have, you know, maybe an hour-long interview with them that we can draw on the audio from. And even if we're adding to that with a new interview, but we can draw on all that amazing archival sound to tell that story.
Kevin, when you are a sports editor at your college paper, you are obviously therefore put in charge of a staff of writers and coming up with ideas for them or listening to the ideas they have. What goes into managing a staff like that, and what did you learn about yourself by being an editor, and how did that impact the way you approach and work with editors now in a professional setting?
So, as an editor, you're basically a manager. Like, if you ever worked retail, it's very similar. But yeah, I learned that it probably wasn't the best thing for me, but it's something I needed to experience, and it really solidified that I enjoy being a writer much more. Because as a sports editor, at least in college, like, I would barely write anymore. I had a lot of people writing, so I had to. The number one priority was getting the paper out and putting content out. But working with people that aren't as passionate as you is very difficult. So if you're ever an editor, you're gonna have to deal with that and find a way to do things, and all the responsibility lies on you. So whatever happens, you just have to be prepared to take the fall, or even when good things happen, like, you'll be rewarded. So yeah, it's a good experience. If you ever have an opportunity to do it, just try it out. But it's not for everyone. It's a leadership position. You have to lead people. That's all I'm gonna say.
I think we're ready to open it for questions. Anyone have any? Oh yeah, that's what it said on the thing.
I stopped at snacks.
I mean,
our snacks, you got me.
I did too. I was like, if I was not on the panel, I'd be here anyway, just for the snacks alone, right? Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Pete. I am a PR professional for Business Wire as well as a freelance sports journalist. So my question is for E specifically. You talked about coming from more of a business background. You talked about some of the struggles of like not having maybe that institutional sports knowledge. So I'm wondering just what are some of the strengths that you got from that background that have helped you make this transition now into sports?
I would say that one is just identifying a good story and something that can hold the specific format that we do every day. So, is there context? Is there something we can explain? What's the right time to do the story? Do we know enough about this situation, or should we wait until we have some more information to really round it out? It's not breaking news, right? Like something might break, but depending on what time it happens and where it is, it's not a full episode for us because of our format. And that takes a lot of discipline if you are coming from a newsroom that does live broadcast or breaking news. It's like, okay, let's just sit with this for a minute and see where it goes, see what it turns into. It's a really specific format that we do, and that's been a big change for me, honestly, too, because I'm used to working on like a magazine show, which is a little more like a newspaper, something where you give each story its due and you move on to the next one if it doesn't warrant that much space. It takes a lot of discipline to do this form of one longer story a day, a different way of thinking about the timing. So I think that's one thing I've learned is like matching the format to the content. Also, just since it's interview format, that's what you got to work with, right? We don't have a lot of other voices and sources in there, so making sure that we're representing other perspectives, that we're being skeptical enough about certain things, that we're asking the right questions and pushing a little bit when we don't get the answer that we want, maybe asking a follow-up if we think they didn't answer it sufficiently, just asking again, because that's what we got. If it's an interview format, that's what you have to work with. You have to represent, the host has to represent the other perspectives that might be involved. And what else have I brought to it? I guess for business reporting, I'm always going to look for the money. Who's got their financial interest at stake in this? Why is someone saying what they're saying that might have to do with how their livelihood is involved? We had a great episode this week about the NFL collective bargaining agreement, and we're lucky at the network to have Dominique Foxworth, who actually negotiated, was head of the NFL Players Association last time around, and he brought excellent perspective on, it's the 17th game, they're talking about adding one more game. Okay, they're trying to normalize this idea of just one more game, and it's not at all just one more game. This is the toll that it could take on the players, on their lives, on their bodies, and here's what we're really talking about here. We're talking about money in relation to physical health and safety, and that's as a former business reporter, that's a topic I can get with. We're gonna have a labor discussion about sports. I'm in. So that's the kind of stuff that I think you realize it's a beat, and it's an amazing beat, and people are. It's a discipline. It's a dedication. I have so much respect for the people who come up through it and what they know that I absolutely don't know. And so I think a lot of it too is that classic skill of a journalist of being able to listen, just observe, listen, and learn what I can from these amazing colleagues around me who've done this for so long and done it so well.
Any other questions? We'll go over here.
For everybody, do any of you know of, are there any resources that any of you know of for queer, transgender, or LGBTQ plus people who would want to get into these mostly white male-dominated spaces?
I don't know anything specific, but just advice is try to get to know as many people as you can. Mm-hmm. No matter what the situation is, someone out there will try to help you, no matter who you are, what you represent. Mm-hmm. So that's just general advice.
I might get back to you on that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think I know. Did you throw it out?
I was going to say NLGJA. You can check out their website. They have a bunch of resources. I know 2 years ago ESPN was a big sponsor of the conference, so they had a bunch of different sports things.
Young man, did you have a question?
So Mina Kimes is an investigative journalist who now a lot of people just know her from highly questionable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My students here, I try to emphasize kind of diversifying your portfolio, things like that. Could you all kind of touch on that? And then Eve, I also had another question about they're starting to get really into podcasting, and I'm trying to keep them from just going on and bloviating for a while. So the editing that you were talking about with the podcasting, I'd like you to touch on a little bit of that. But so 2 questions.
So the first part of your question, again, if you don't mind repeating it, I remember it.
Like diversifying your portfolio, like just getting into different aspects, multimedia, in addition to writing.
So just for me, when I started in community college, I swore up and down I was only going to do sports journalism and nothing else. And then my professor told me at the time, he said, so what if an entertainment job became available and someone offered it to you? I said, well, I'd take it in a heartbeat. And then he said, but you wouldn't know how to do anything with it. I was like, oh yeah, I guess I better start like working on it now. And then so 6 years later, you know, I'm still working in the sports department, but somehow I ended up doing social media and stuff at Coachella, and I was completely out of my element. And I was so like, you know, you just never know what you're going to be asked to do or what ways you're going to, what opportunities are awaiting you. But if you just pigeonhole yourself from the jump to, I'm never going to pick up a camera, or I'm never going to do a hard news story or anything like that, then no one's ever going to offer you those kind of opportunities. So again, just being open to different things. While this is the sports journalism panel, like you said, you were mainly news up until joining ESPN, correct? So, I mean, you never know what's really on the horizon for you.
Yeah, when I did my internship through SJI, it was 8 weeks. I did 8 weeks, and it was a sports-specific internship. But Tom Moore, one of his things I like to do is have you spend 1 week of those 8 weeks doing cops. And so I shadowed Larry Altman. So I shadowed Larry Altman for a week, who was our long time cop reporter at the Daily Breeze, and just watched him kind of work. And he taught me about using the search database to get to court documents and stuff like that. And unfortunately, sometimes athletes do get arrested. They do bad stuff. And you need to know how to search those court records. So it's very important. And sometimes the UCLA basketball team goes to China and they get arrested, and then you start learning about the Chinese government.
Yeah, right.
You don't plan that, but I learned a lot about the Chinese law one day. You know, so even if you think you're just going to be writing about sports, sometimes sports expands and you write about different things, and those are the most interesting stories. Because you can write a million gamers in your life, but are you ever going to remember that one regular season basketball game? No.
Yeah, that's so true.
You're gonna remember the story about Kayla Nohashi, and the reason why stories like that become so memorable is because they're not about sports. They're about people who play sports, and that's really what we're all doing here, whether you're in news or sports or business or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean so the crime you used it it all.
Yeah.
See, if you would have told me 4 years ago, you're gonna have to do a cop story one day, I said, no, I'm not. I'm only gonna do stuff on the court.
Yeah.
And then, Evan, any?
Yeah. So like I said before, you just gotta be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Heading into Long Beach, all I ever did was write, so I had no experience with photography, any of that. And then those 2 years, I learned Photoshop, making graphics, stuff like that, podcasting. And now I do my own podcast. I take photos for fun, write all this stuff, make videos. So if you really just think about it, if you're going up against someone for a job, would they rather take the person that could do 10 things or just the writer? You know? So just think about that, especially with how things are changing in our industry. Something else I was gonna say earlier was you should also kind of see yourself as a brand, because that's just how it is now with social media. You were talking about your Twitter thing. Yeah. but
then the guy next to you says, that's your thing. That.
Yeah.
I'm just
for me, I when I cover sports, I have a kind of cynical, sarcastic view, because it's just people take it too seriously. Like she was saying. So have fun with it, build your brand, and you never know what opportunity is going to come. Like James said, you be covering Coachella one day, and the next day it's like a Final Four championship.
right.
So just be ready.
Yeah, I would say on encouragement for diversifying the kinds of stories you do. One of our most successful episodes so far is from an NBA reporter named Kevin Arnovitz, who did an investigation on the Sacramento Kings, and an executive there who stole millions of dollars from the team by diverting some sponsorship contracts to an LLC that he created that was his own company. This was all discovered by a woman in human resources after he left the team and had already started a new job at the Miami Heat. So it's totally just a financial story. It's a backroom story. It's HR and the chief financial officer guy, right? There's nothing on court about it. There's nothing about it that has anything to do with the team, has anything to do with the actual playing of basketball. But it's one of our most successful episodes. It's just so interesting. This kind of mild-mannered, suit who almost pulled off this huge embezzlement, the largest that we know of in NBA history, and then got an FBI sting on him from Stacy and HR. So that was a great story. We want more stories like that. Like on our show, we've kind of said that like once a week we want a story that no one would expect us to do. It's all like the balance, and on our show we're really dependent on the writers bringing those ideas to their editors and getting those ideas assigned. And in terms of, you asked about editing for podcasts, I think there are, that's one thing that's unique about our show is that it's not just talking. One of the things that people appreciate about it is that it's about 25 minutes long. And when you edit down the audio, I mean, that's a technical skill, but it's also an editorial sensibility. You record a longer interview, you edit it out in our case, we have a target length we're going for, so we edit out, to that length. But I think some of it is also exploring that you can write for audio, that it's still a lot about writing. Some of our best, really all of our best descriptions of scenes, I mean, someone describing something to you, it's still about language, it's still about writing. There's a way to kind of write for the ear, the shorter sentences and spacing things out that can be really effective. That's different than just talking and conversation and analysis, which is awesome. I mean, that stuff's great too, and people love that and they eat that up, especially in the sports world. But there is a sort of more still storytelling aspect where you get more into like writing scripted narrative, and then in the case of something like the Sterling Affairs, serialized stories over a number of episodes, and it's just a different way of looking at it. And my best advice for that would be just like to take a shot at it and understand that it is writing. That there's talking and then there's writing, and they're kind of connected. But for what you're talking about, you really want to sit down and like write something, deliver it, almost like an op-ed. Maybe that's a way to start, is to try write kind of a first person, your thoughts about something. And if you want something to listen to along those lines, might I suggest ESPN Daily. And Mina at the end of the show does like a 2.5 minute thing where she does just kind of what I'm talking about. She picks a topic that's maybe a little, at the edges, on the fringes, or something that's important to her, and she writes out a script and she delivers it, and she really writes it. It's all writing, and it's about 2.5 minutes long. Put a little music under it. That might be a really cool exercise to try.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You have something?
Yeah, I was also gonna say, like, diversify like the publications that you read, because sports journalism isn't just like LA Times, like paper, or we take things a little more seriously, like stories. But for example, one of my favorite publications is The Ringer, and they have stories like, I don't know if you remember from a few years ago, the like Twitter burner account like investigative story they did. Like that was great. Like we need more stuff like that. So don't think you just have to be a serious sports writer, because it's not all about that anymore.
NBA desktop.
Yeah, stuff like that. It's like it's fun, like it's entertaining, but yeah.
I have a question for Eve, just because we have similar backgrounds, but you guys feel free to because I want to hear your advice as well. So I'm actually a 2-time Emmy-winning TV producer. So I specialize in story. I've worked with Shane for years and Dr. Phil. that type of thing. I'm tired of doing reality. I'm burnt out. And I love sports. I've been a fan forever. I'm huge Eagles. I'm huge NFL. I have friends in the league. Blah 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 blah. I'm trying to transition now. So I'm trying to do sports reporting, sideline reporting, and I guess I'm not having trouble transitioning. But what advice would you give me or everybody to transition, to help me transition? Because I'm not being being taken seriously, but not totally.
Into sports
from other
media. I mean,
I'm a woman too.
It is a transition. It's a very specific discipline. I can say that I do think it's a there's a tribalism to it, as I'm sure you guys know. I'm new to the tribe, so even as I'm saying this out loud, I'm like everyone's judging what I'm saying. I think it's like having respect for the discipline of it and having respect for the sort of hierarchy of it too. That it seems to me hard to break into. But one way to break in is just having a unique voice, having something to offer that world. Like whether you're coming in, for me, it's more the long form storytelling angle. Like I'm coming at it from that, and that's the value that I'm bringing to it. That would make me a good candidate for the position that I have. I mean, in terms of reporting, I don't know that much about the world of freelancing, especially on the broadcasting side. I think it's got to be about getting your reel together and that type of thing. But I know that it's just a very specific tribe, and you got to swim along with the people who are in it, and it's a craft. And that's what I've just really seen is so. I don't know what advice you guys would probably have better advice than I would for breaking into sports journalism.
Connections.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Connections.
exactly.
Yeah.
I also feel like you were talking earlier about how she didn't come from
Right.
sports.
That's why.
So,
Yeah, that's why.
Right.
I think that's almost a good thing. Like it's awful when you get 5
It's so
sports
nice to hear you
specific
say that.
people in one room.
Yeah.
Because you can't do anything except for think about sports.
Yeah.
So I think it's good when you get someone else, and so you should own your unique experience and then kind of think about what unique ability you bring, and then try to apply it. Yeah, that's the word.
Right.
To what sports brings, because it's good to have diverse outlooks. Like I majored in math in college actually,
Super
and
dope.
so a lot of people would think oh, what are you doing here in journalism?
Right.
You just put that math part of you aside and never think about it. But sometimes I actually do math stuff. It's that's something unique that only I can bring. So you just have to celebrate your own uniqueness and then bring it to wherever you're going.
Yeah.
Right.
And don't diminish that part of you just because you think it's in another world. You can bring it into this world.
Yeah, what she said. Yeah, Cam, you got
Yeah, I have a question for the panel. Thank you. This conversation is excellent, by the way. Relocation for your opportunity. I think you guys should consider that. Talk about that.
And we kind of talked about that before too, right?
Well, I want to know if your answer changed.
It has not. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just finished school. I've been working for the Southern California News Group for 5 years, and I've been in college the whole time as well. Full-time student, part-time, and then full-time employee as well. So this is honestly the only job I've ever had. I started answering phones. So when you went back to how you can transition, I was gonna say, I started answering phones, and I don't think you're probably a little better than just starting answering phones. But yeah, so I just kind of worked my way up, and I wouldn't want to say I'm comfortable where I'm at, but I really haven't had much of a reason to want to leave, just because of everything that's going to be happening in SoCal. If that makes sense with the Olympics and the Super Bowl, and I don't want to be in Virginia and then looking at everything in SoCal on TV like I do everything else right now and be like, I wish I was at home. So for me, I don't know. I've considered it, but maybe you guys would. Thuc Nhi, I mean from Washington.
I'm originally from Seattle,
Okay.
so I'm located here, and I graduated in 2015 from college, and exactly 1 week after my graduation, I packed up my car and drove from Seattle to LA with my mom for this job, and it was actually part-time at the time. I was hired in a part-time job, $10 a week, or $10 an hour, 20 hours a week. But that's like such a difficult thing to pull off. I was super lucky because my older sister at the time got a job in LA at the exact same time, and so I lived with her. She's a doctor, so like, there's no way I would be able to do it. I was really lucky. I was really lucky. A lot of things had to fall in place for me.
Right.
But I think like there was a time in my life where, because I grew up in Seattle, I went to college there, and I was like, you know, I'm young. I'm gonna go give this thing a try. If I don't get a full-time job in a year, I'll just go back home and start again. But it worked out for me, and I like kept finding places to go, and I got hired, and I got hired full time after 5 weeks, so I didn't have to live on $10 an hour for that long, thankfully. But like, I don't think you should shy away from relocation, because even if you feel like you're moving away from like the epicenter of sports for right now, like the Olympics aren't coming until 2028.
I mean, yeah, no, that's totally
You got
true.
a long time
That's
to go
no,
away,
it's true.
kick ass, and then come back.
Because I sometimes I feel silly like even thinking about it. Like the Olympics are in like 4 years. I mean, what do you? But I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm open. You know, I'm open to stuff, obviously. But it just depends.
You sounds like you think you should go somewhere else.
I was really just giving it a hard time.
That's
We had this conversation before.
I'm sure it's not the last time we'll have that conversation. Did you guys have anything to add?
I guess I was going to say career-wise, you know, I started as an intern at NPR as an unpaid intern, which they don't do anymore, thankfully. They pay their interns now. And I lived with my college roommate's family and took the train and drove 15 minutes to the last train stop and took the train in for, you know, an hour-long train ride each way every day to not get paid. And, you know, I guess I would say that then there was sort of a decision to stay in there and be like a production assistant and kind of work up that way, or move to a smaller market and get more responsibility. And you kind of like, I still think there's a lot of that in play in terms of, you guys are all already here in Southern California, obviously, so there's a lot of that, even not just maybe organization-wise. Do you want more responsibility at a smaller place and then go to a bigger place and take maybe a more niche or narrow role? And I think if you think about like what you want what are you going to learn in the next job? You know, like what are you going to learn that you don't know already? What's going to be interesting about it for you? Not just getting caught up on like the brand name associated with the organization, but like what's going to be cool for you to experience and learn, and what are you going to be able to add to your skill set from whatever, even individual story assignment or job assignment that you take.